2. The Brittonic source's rendition of the Claudian invasion. The accounts of Tacitus and Cassius Dio are evidently anachronistic reimaginings of Britain and Rome's shared past. Their cynical creation during the most significant period of church devolution and classical fabrication strips them of all credibility. The absence of any corroborative literary or archaeological evidence to qualify their existence and accounts confirms their incredibility irredeemably. Nevertheless, the Claudian invasion and the subsequent development of a meaningful relationship between Britain and Rome during the first century is undeniable and necessitates re-examination. Beyond the fanciful falsehoods which have been perpetuated by traditionalists since the Renaissance, we have already identified a far more insightful source in Geoffrey of Monmouth's original transcription of the Brittonic source. The illuminations which it has already provided concerning Caesar's invasions and the intervening period have brought clarity and understanding where there was none. Acton Griscom's extrapolation of the Brittonic source from within the wider work of Geoffrey's Historia Regum Britanniae has already proven to be revelatory. It unveiled an original account of the British records, which accompanied the exiled agents of the British Church to Brittany during the 5th century, and of which Gildas lamented the loss. Read alongside the classical accounts, it clarifies Britain's inexplicable placidity after Caesar's invasions. Moreover, it illuminates the resumption of animosity and conflict following the demise of Cynwalyn, Cunobellinus, circa AD 40. The accession of his British-born offspring and Rome's resolute protection of a perceived pretender, Adminius, caused Britain to withhold its tribute and invite war with Rome. The invasion's inception was signalled by Caligula's exuberant reception of the fugitive Adminius. However, and after protracted planning and preparation, it fell to his successor to head the invasion. According to the Brittonic source, Claudius appears to have grasped the initiative with an unexpected landing on the eastern banks of Southampton Water, between the River Hamble and the Solent. This was a historically novel and, in some respects, ingenious tactic. Presumably through reconnaissance, Rome identified that Britain's attention and defences were concentrated on the traditional eastern approaches to the island. These clearly offered the shorter crossing distances from Gaul and afforded the shortest route to the capital. Moreover, they had previously been favoured by the proven military mind and abilities of Julius Caesar. Nonetheless, Claudius's unorthodox decision to land via the Solent promised an unopposed landing and the element of surprise, something which Caesar's landings at Dover and the Thames had not enjoyed. Crucially, however, it removed many of the advantages evidently considered and valued by Caesar, namely the considerable logistical advantages for supplies, reinforcements, and extraction if necessary. Regardless, Rome ultimately assured itself that a successful and unopposed landing of a significant force would prove sufficient to bring Britain to terms. Rome's objective remained clear: to re-establish its stake in the British crown and reap the revenue of the island's prodigious trade. Rome undoubtedly gave serious consideration to its historic failings to colonize Britain. The pre-invasion writings of both Propertius and Horace lamented this fact and beseeched the gods for assistance in achieving this aim. Therefore, a dynamic contingency plan must have been considered, one which served Rome's overriding ambition to secure the British crown, even if the invasion faltered. The evident lack of domestic support for Adminius in Britain undermined any unswerving insistence on his accession by Rome. It would prove an unwise and counterproductive approach if the planned invasion met with significant military resistance or defeat. Therefore, a conciliatory armistice, pertaining to the abandonment of Roman support for Adminius's claim, must have been contemplated. A proposition of partnership through a marriage of state would nullify past hostilities and reinforce Rome's primary objective without additional bloodshed, expenditure, or protraction. Furthermore, a conjoining of the two powers' ruling families would circumvent the wider dissension of tributaries across its empire. The evident animosity towards Adminius in Britain ensured that Rome's unswerving support of his claim could jeopardize Rome's primary goal. A hostile takeover bid was a gambler's plan littered with unattractive possibilities and outcomes, including wasteful expenditure and the possibility of rebellion spreading throughout the empire. Britain's tribute had originally only been secured by an inglorious betrayal, and not by unilateral military success. Caesar had failed twice, comprehensively, and only returned a third time when invited by Afawi, the bona fide heir apparent to the British crown. Adminius evidently did not enjoy this prestigious condition amongst the British, and was considered a fugitive and a pretender. This meant that any invasion, even if immediately successful, could ultimately become costly and futile. Claudius's invasion. The Brittonic source confirms that Rome sent Claudius and a great army to Britain because Guidra, the current king of Britain and eldest native son of the late Cynvelyn, withheld the tribute. The invasion force reportedly landed and attacked Kerberis, Portchester, and fought against the fort. However, and because he was initially unsuccessful, Claudius closed up the gates of the town with a stone wall to shut up the multitude within until they died of famine. On hearing this, King Guidro led a great host against the invading force at the besieged fort, but was killed during the ensuing battle. His younger brother, Arviragus, immediately put on his brother's royal armor and incited his men to fight. They successfully splintered the Roman army and forced the larger part to flee the battlefield. Believing Claudius to be amid those who fled, Arviragus pursued them towards Southampton Water, some 10 miles to the west. In fact, Claudius was amongst the remnants of the invading force which, during the absence of Arviragus and his army, resumed their attack on Portchester. By the time the British returned, Claudius had taken the fort. Having successfully reduced and isolated the enemy, Arviragus exploited his advantage and led his army north to Winchester, some 20 miles inland. From this point on, Arviragus appears to have recovered from his unexpected and impassioned accession to kingship and his fallacious pursuit of the invaders to their landing area. Although not explicitly recorded as such, Arviragus's tactical retreat inland replicates two strategies implemented by Cassibelanus against Caesar. Indeed, had Claudius been equally familiar with Caesar's experiences in Britain, he would not have found his army desolate and isolated. Caesar's choice of landing area, reconnaissance, and evident military prowess ensured his force was neither exposed nor divided on a significant scale. Moreover, the evident value he placed in the protection of his ships and supply line meant that he averted the calamities which Claudius soon lamented. Nevertheless, Claudius now faced a perilous predicament. His options were all unfavourable. Firstly, he could remain at Portchester, which he had already besieged, creating a condition of starvation so there was little or no sustenance available. Secondly, the larger part of his army had been pursued and killed whilst they attempted to flee from their embarkation point. Therefore, there was no prospect of reinforcements of troops or supplies. His only remaining option was to pursue the native army. This necessitated leading his diminished force into the unfamiliar interior of the island, advancing without strength, support, or supplies, and without any plausible prospect of escape or extraction. Even if Claudius could have fled Britain at this juncture, such a depleted and disgraced return to Rome would have been no less damning than his present predicament at Portchester. Claudius was therefore compelled to follow Arviragus inland to Winchester, exposing his forlorn force to attacks from cover in the unfamiliar and hostile territory. Deprived of their original supply line and suffering from their own siege and starvation of Portchester, the remnants of the Roman army could not hope to forage without fatal harassment. No doubt the beleaguered Claudius must have become increasingly perturbed at the condition of his exhausted army. Their punishing progress towards Winchester, without prospect of retreat or reinforcements, was patently futile. Mutiny must have been considered, but was undoubtedly mastered by the inevitability of starvation, slavery, or slaughter. Indeed, somewhere along the 20-mile trek through the thick broadleaf woodland and testing hills of Hampshire, between Portchester and Winchester, Claudius accepted that his and his troops' very existence was to be defined by Arviragus, king of the Britons. Claudius approached Winchester cowed and conciliatory before the British king and his reinforced army. Claudius saw this and sent to the British to ask for peace, and forthwith peace was made between them. And to confirm the peace, Claudius gave his daughter to Arviragus to wife and accepted the Orkneys in return. When winter slipped away, the maid, matchless in her form and fairness, came from Rome, and Arviragus married her. In commemoration, Claudius built a city called Caerloeu, Gloucester. The Brittonic source confirms a key element from the accounts of Suetonius and Josephus. The invasion was remarkably short and successful. However, and contrary to the bogus Renaissance accounts of Tacitus and Dio, the soldiers remained in Britain as labourers and not as conquerors or colonizers. Claudius's invasion was an unmitigated military failure, but a miraculous diplomatic success. Facing annihilation, Claudius had prostrated himself and offered his daughter in reconciliation. Ironically, he achieved in submission what he had sought through war. The marriage of state, whether premeditated or not, at once resolved the British dispute over succession, tribute, and trade, and granted Rome the coveted stake it sought in the British crown. Claudius memorialized the union by naming his son Britannicus, British,